Hi everyone, welcome to Cloud Ranger's Microsoft Azure Training, the 2018 edition. As you know, I'm Sean Ismail. My contact information is below there. Twitter, blog, LinkedIn, and you're most likely watching this on YouTube right now. The course repository is on GitHub at that location, and the slides will be posted on slideshare.net. Today, we are going to discuss the lesson 2 of module 2. So the module 2 is implementing and managing Azure networking. The lesson 1, you may have already watched that, where I went over the Azure networking components and what they are briefly. But today we are going to get into lesson 2, which is implementing and managing the virtual networks or the VNets. And I'm calling this part 1. And I'll explain in a bit that why I have split this in part 1 and part 2. Okay, so let's get started. One thing about this lesson is I'm very excited actually today because this is, I mean, if you have been watching all these lessons, we have been very light on hands-on. Today we are going to really get hands-on in the lab and start building stuff. So you're going to do a lot of stuff. So if you want to go out and grab some tea or coffee and settle down and, be in a quiet spot so you can concentrate quite a bit and get your hands dirty doing some lab work, today is the day. Get started. And once you're ready, pause the video. Once you're ready, come back and we'll do this, okay? You're ready? Okay. So in the previous lesson, we have talked about Azure's networking components, and I actually copied and pasted that in this slide. So all those components are the ones we went over. The one in the bold today are the ones today that we are going to go over and build. So the virtual networks or VNet, I put a little asterisk there because that's what today's lesson is all about. But look at this, all the other components that I've highlighted there, I mean, or I put in bold there, like subnets, network interface cards, IP addresses, VNet DNS, all those things will be touched, and we are going to go over that hands-on and build them or talk about them while as we build them and do some stuff. Okay, so let's move on. A little brief about the Azure Virtual Networks. In the previous lesson, we went, give a little bit of a high level stuff, but I'm going to talk about some specific characteristics or specific things we do or plan in virtual networks. So it helps us get into the nitty gritty of stuff when we actually start building the VNets, okay? So as we know, for Azure Virtual Networks, it's the core component of Azure networking. So you create a virtual network or a VNet first. Okay, it provides the logical boundary. Like I mentioned in the previous lesson, that this will give you a logical boundary of how your network looks, a specific network. It's typically defined by private IP address space, and this is a very important. I'll get into a little bit of details in this in the next slide. But you actually have a private IP address that will define your network. It will be your network ID. And one thing we talked about in the previous lesson as well, and I keep referring previous lessons because we have went over, we went over a bunch of this stuff is your virtual network can have multiple subnets, and you have to remember in an on-premises network, when you just create one network, by default, that is the subnet, right? You don't go specifically try to go and build a subnet or make any configurations on premises to build a subnet because your very first network is the very first subnet. In Azure, you have to actually create the first subnet, and you must have at least one subnet for your Azure network to be effective or built or provisioned correctly. Okay, you have to remember that. In fact, as we go through the wizard, today we'll be doing everything on the portal. You'll notice that it is one of those required fields where you have to fill in a subnet name, and you have to do that. Without the subnet, you're not going to move forward. The next thing you have to remember is the VNets reside in Azure regions, or on the portal, we call it locations. Um, this cannot be changed once created. So if you have a virtual network that is created, let's say in East US, you will not be able to destroy that or without destroying that, actually build it in another region, right? So typically the way we select region is the one that's closest to you or it serves your business requirements. If you're building your network over there or the VNet over there, you got to have it there. Okay. If you plan to move it, you can't, you'll have to destroy it. The other thing about virtual networks is it provides the IP addresses to your virtual machines or the VMs. Okay, I put DHCP with a question mark over there. Is let's say on premises you create a network today and you hook up a server or you connect your desktop or laptop depending on what network it is. Someone should give you an IP address because without the IP address you cannot do anything. In real life, when you're building a network for server purposes, you at least I never kept a DHCP server because I knew that I'm going to get into these servers. I'm going to put a static IP address for this server or this virtual machine, and that's how it's going to be. But in Azure, when you create a virtual network and you create a virtual machine, it actually gives you an IP address based on the address space that we will create. The reason behind that is if you are on premises and you create a server, you don't need an IP address to be given to it because you have a direct access to the server. You can hook up your keyboard and monitor and you're good to go. Or if you're on a virtual machine in VMware or Hyper-V, it gives you the console access, so you don't need networking setup. But in Azure, since you don't have console accesses directly to a server, um, you have to have a network. Means I mean, your network needs to be established. It has to have an IP address for you to even connect to it to do anything. So by default, Azure's VNet will provide you that DHCP service. Okay, you don't have to create the DHCP server. It will be just given to you. You don't even see it how it's being given to you. Now, if you want to get a little bit into the details of how this DHCP is working, it's not technically giving you a static IP address. It's actually giving you an IP address with an infinite lease on it. So if you restart the virtual machine, you'll always keep getting the same IP address. You don't have to give a static IP address. But most servers should have a static IP address, and I'll show you how to do that in the VNet, okay? But this is just for your information. This lease is always there till the virtual machine is stopped, or it's called deallocated in Azure, where if you stop the virtual machine and some other machine actually ends up getting that address, uh, I mean, some other machine actually may end up getting that address. It's no longer going to be held for you. The only reason you will keep getting it back is if the virtual machine is already there and you keep restarting it, and you'll always get there, okay? These things will all become clear when we are in the portal, and I'll show you how to build this. Um, so the VNet provides Azure provided DNS service by default. Like I mentioned in my previous lesson, you don't need a DNS server within the virtual network. One will be provided to you for doing local resolution, like one server looking up another server, or even the servers itself trying to look for going to the internet, right? So if you go to google.com or microsoft.com, it will actually resolve everything for you. So uh, so far, what we have described over here is that as soon as you create a virtual machine, your IP addresses are given you by the DHCP server. The DNS is given by the Azure's built-in DNS. As you can see, those things you don't have to build, and by default, VNet actually gives them to you, right? So it tries to get you up and running as soon as possible. Now, the last thing you have to remember, and this is and all of these things, by the way, are quite important for your exams, right? I mean, I do not know what the questions are any longer on these exams, and neither can I discuss them, but um, a lot of this information is very important to remember for your exam purposes. So the last one is VMs can move between subnets. So if you have a virtual network and you create multiple subnets, you can have a virtual machine move from one subnet to another. Okay, so you have to remember that. What the virtual machines cannot do is move from one virtual network to another virtual network. There are ways to manually do that in the back end, and someday in one of the lessons I'll actually show you how to do that, but it's not as easy. But with the subnets within the same virtual network, since you are already there, the virtual machines can be moved. Okay, so moving on, I want to talk about the private IP address. As you remember in a couple of slides, I mean, in previous slides, I mentioned that your virtual network is defined by the private address space, right? So you need to give a private IP address for as the network ID, or all the machines that you will be creating or resources that you will be creating will all have those IP addresses. So for your networking folks, you don't have to worry about anything. This is just a private IP address, as you can imagine, 10.x.x.x. So you can pick up anything from the 10 range or 172 to 172.16 .x.x to 172.31.x.x. And by the way, that x.x, they can actually go all the way from 0 to 255, okay? And the last one is 192.168.x.x. So these are the like the class C IP addressing scheme and should be very straightforward. And as long as you keep within this scheme, that can be used for your private net IP addresses. For you folks who don't know about this, is private IP addresses are actually reserved to Class C, this specific Class C ones. The reason behind that is that you cannot have a public address based on that, and it's pretty well recognized all over the world, and that's how it is. That any private address will be within this range, and the public addresses will not be able to take this. Okay, so the thing you have to remember here, and this is both from an exam and practical point of view, is that this private IP address should be planned properly. And by what I mean is, if you're building this in a lab, since this is all private IP address, you don't have to care. You can create whatever address you want. You can, break it, practice, do whatever, change them. It's not a problem. But if you are doing this in production, you have to choose it carefully because what happens is if you don't choose it carefully, it's not going to matter if you don't create hybrid connectivity. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have 10.1.1.0/24 as your IP network on premises, you will not be able to have something overlapping that in the cloud if you do a hybrid connectivity. I'm pretty sure some of you folks who are familiar with networking already realize that, because even we used to have these issues back in the days when we had multiple sites which had their own private addresses, and you had to create a site-to-site VPN. If they overlapped, you couldn't do that because you the site-to-site VPN will extend your network, but it doesn't mean that you can use the same addresses in both sides. It had to be different. So the similar thing happens in the cloud as well in Azure. That when you are planning this, you want to make sure that your on-premises network does not have those IP addresses, okay? The rule of thumb is do not use something that is already being used on premises in case someday you have to have a hybrid connection. Certain organizations, they're like, okay, we'll never have a hybrid presence. We'll just have a presence in the cloud. We don't care as long as those private IP addresses are working, and that works. But I have seen that, people tried first the cloud thing in the organization, then all of a sudden they got serious about it, and they were like, okay, we need a site to site between our data center and Microsoft's data center on Azure for Azure, and that was a lot of problem. So planning is very important in production environment, and you need to plan this out properly. Okay, now what are we going to build today? This is the most interesting part. I'm really excited to do this. I hope you guys are too. So we are going to create this virtual network here. So obviously my VNet, this is the one we are going to create. This boundary over here is just the VNet, right? That's the virtual network or your network. But we're going to make this interesting. We're going to create two subnets. We know that we at least would need one, but I'm going to make two. And I'll show you the reason. Well, I can tell you the reason I'm doing that is because I want to show you the characteristics of what the subnets can do and the servers or the VMs on the subnets can do. So we're going to create two subnets on this. I'm going to create a couple of virtual machines and on the subnet 1, and I'll have one machine on subnet 2, and we're going to do some interaction over here. Okay, so the address space that I will be choosing is 10.3.0.0, and this is a CIDR notation, by the way. What this means is really 255, 255.0.0, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a subnet in here that's going to be 10.3.1.0 /24, and the subnet 2 is going to be 10.3.2. And based on that, I'm going to put a couple of static IP addresses to these virtual machines. Since this virtual machine is in this subnet, it's going to be 10.3.1.5 and 10.3.1.6. And this one I'm going to do 10.3.2.5 because this subnet is 10.3.2.0 subnet, and that's the network ID for this subnet. Okay, and once we do this, we are going to check some connectivity. I'm going to talk about how to set them up, how they're going to the internet, what we need to look out for, or what we need to, where exactly we need to go to see some of these configurations. So the basic things you need absolutely to plan out or know about creating a VNet is all over here. Okay, the first thing you need is a VNet name. As we build resources in Azure, you'll find out Azure is big on names. Like you have to have names for everything because that's how they track it. That's how, if you're going to eventually do this in um, some sort of scripting, you refer to them by name. So you need a VNet name. In our case, my VNet name is going to be my VNet. Excuse me. In production, I mean, if you're going to build this in production for your work, or even in your lab, you can have any VNet name you choose, right? I mean, it really is yours. It's internal to you. So you can have whatever you want. We need the address space in CIDR notation. So this is the address space I'm going to use because, technically I can really use any addresses that I pick from here. As you can imagine, I picked 10.3 dot 0 dot 0 over here. Um, if you're doing this in production, pick one carefully, plan it out. This is where you need to talk to your networking guys, find out, hey guys, what are the private IP addresses you have, what I can use over here, because we may need hybrid connection someday. If you're doing this in the lab, don't worry about it. Pick whatever you want. Then you need the subscription or the subscription name. By default, it will be picked from you. I mean, for you. You need a resource group, like I mentioned in one of my previous lessons, that everything in Azure is built in a resource group. So you have to have a resource group where everything else will be deployed. So we'll have a resource group. If you don't create the resource group first, when you create the virtual network, it will actually ask you that, hey, do you want to create a resource group or you want to use one existing one? Typically, I'll create the resource group first because it's easy for me to remember. I like planning out better. Okay. And the next thing is the location. You have to remember where this virtual network will be situated. So, like I mentioned, which Azure region or location, you need that. We need the subnet name. Like you need at least one subnet to be created in the VNet, like I've mentioned. So you need a subnet name and you need the subnet space. So this is the one we'll probably start off with, my subnet one, and this is the address space for that subnet. As you can imagine, this subnet is actually part of this address space. If you use something else over here, let's say we use the 10.300 here, but you go and pick for this subnet something off 172.16 or somewhere 192.168, it's not going to work because it's going to say, hey, it does not fall in this VNet address space and I cannot build that. The one other option that is there, you don't have to worry too much about it because it basically gives you an option say that, hey, do you need this VNet to have some sort of distributed denial of service attack protection? uh, like, do you need some DDoS protection? Typically, I just go with the basic because it's free of charge. If you want something more, something more robust, you have to pay for it. But you have to remember that DDoS protection can be done at your network level over here, and Azure will do that by default for you. And that's already crazy if you think about it. Like to do DDoS protection on premises, you can only imagine the kind of hardware you need, the kind of protection you need, planning and all that. Azure does all of that for you, right? And the other thing we talked about was in previous lesson was the service endpoints. Like, hey, if you want this virtual network to actually communicate with a platform as a service, like Azure Storage or Azure's own SQL service, and do you need those service endpoints? So we're not going to get into that. But what I'm trying to get to over here is that these are absolutely the information or the planning that you need to do for even creating something simple like this. Okay, these are the basic information. Now, I think this is a lot of slides. It's already 18 to 20 minutes in this lecture. Let's go ahead and build this. I'm going to keep referring to this image over here. So, and the slides will be posted so you can actually look at this and build this yourself in the lab. You can pause and follow along with me right now if you want to build one yourself, but we are going to go hands-on. So this is going to give you not only the skills you require to, or the knowledge you require to pass your exam, but it's going to give you skills in to deploy or provision this in real life at your work or wherever. Okay, so let's get it started. I'm going to go to my system over here where my portal is. Just give me a moment here. All right. So I hope that by now you know how to create your Azure subscription, how to log into it. I'm logged into my Azure subscription. I'm in the dashboard already. If you do not know how to get here, please go watch one of my previous lessons where we go over how to get to the portal, how to subscribe and get to the portal, create your subscription, and log into it. So if you are in your portal and you are not seeing this in the left-hand side, like I mentioned in one of my previous lessons, I actually just go and select the ones I need for this lesson. You can find them under all services. The reason the ones that are showing up over here may not match yours because I went and pretty much checked the ones I really need. So as you can see, if I create on virtual machines, that just disappeared, right? Once you click that, it comes all the way down here, but you can actually move this up right now and put this over here. Okay, so the first thing we need is a resource group. So your resource group, technically in my mind, it kind of is like you're building your own data center, right? So this resource group is, I logically think of it as my data center because my all resources will be together in one resource group. So do I need to create a resource group first to create a virtual network? Yes, I do. I do not have to do it from here. Like I can go to virtual networks. I don't have one over here. If I go and click on add, it will actually ask me to create one. So I like planning a little bit. So I want to go and create the resource group first myself. So I go click on add. It's very simple. It's asking that what resource group name do you want? I'm going to just call it Ranger RG or resource group. That's the convention I sort of follow. You want to name this whatever you want because it's very private to your subscription or your group. If you're doing this in production, um, make it something more sensible, I suppose. Okay, I'm using my subscription over here. You can obviously click the subscription you have over there, and your resource group has, I mean, it has to always be associated with the location. So Microsoft has data center all over the places, right? I'm just picking East US 2 because it's the closest to me. Let's say, for example, I'm actually located in Canada. I could pick up one in Canada. Um, I don't know, Canada East maybe. Let's try that. Pick one that you want. Okay, I want to use East US 2. Let's create the resource group here. As you can imagine, it gets created really fast. If it doesn't show up over here, click on refresh. You can see that my resource group now has been created. It's in location East US2. Let's go and click that here. My resource group resources are empty right now. There's really nothing I have created except this resource group shell that's located there. So today we are going to create virtual networks. So let's go and click on virtual networks here on the VNet. Let's add a virtual network here. You recall in the slide that I mentioned that these are all the information that you will need to create this virtual network. So we are actually creating this right now, right? And that's what it's showing up here is that all that information that I was talking about that you minim like at a minimum, you need all those information. So what did we name our virtual network? We named it as my VNet. So let's go ahead and say that my virtual network name is going to be my VNet. What address space did we have? The address space in CIDR notation or CIDR notation was going to be 10.3.0.0, and you get a you get a little checkbox here if it actually works out. That means if you have this range that you have put over here or this address space, you can have any address between 10.3.0.0 to 10.3.255.255. This is important to remember because when we slice our subnet, we have to remember that. It's going to ask you for your subscription, and your subscription is going to be populated right here. If you have multiple subscriptions in some production network or in a production subscription account somewhere, go pick that up. See, this is what I was talking about earlier, that it's going to ask, do you need to create a resource group or you want to use an existing one, right? Which means that you cannot create any resource in Azure without having a resource group. I'm going to use one existing one, the one I just created, Ranger 1. It will populate that over here. It's asking me again that where you need this. So by default, it's taking the resource group, which was East US2 location, and it's putting that over here. It's asking now the subnet name. As you can imagine, it's RAID asterisk over here means it's a required field. You cannot create a VNet without a subnet in there. So by default, they call it default. Let me see what we are calling ours. We are calling ours my subnet 1, and this is the address space 1031.024 that we are going to have, okay? So let's do that. I'm going to call this my subnet 1, and my address range, and this address range has to fall in between this range of the actual address space, right? So I know that 10.3.1.0/24 actually falls in that range. And if I do that, you can see that for this subnet, I may have 256 addresses, and that will be within the subnet. The checkbox came over here. Okay. Now, this is the thing I was talking about earlier, that it's asking that what kind of DDoS protection you want. I will keep that at basic because I'm not going to get charged for it. If you do standard, it will actually charge you for it. Okay. But the standard one gives you a lot more other protection or a robust protection. For our purposes, leave that there. For the service endpoints, I'm going to keep it disabled, right? If you enable the service endpoints, if you can see all the services you can have over here, like Microsoft SQL, Microsoft Storage, I don't need any service endpoint for this purpose of this example. I'm going to do that over here, and I'm going to click on create. That's really it for us to build this VNet over here and this subnet in there. Obviously, these virtual machines and all are not created yet, but we have essentially created this network over there. So as you can see, the bar is progressing, means it's going, still creating that. Takes, sometimes it takes like a minute, or sometimes I've seen take it a minute or two, and it doesn't take really that long either case. So deployment succeeded. Let's close this over here. It's not showing up in my virtual network, so I'm going to create refresh. Bam, there you go. My virtual network has been created right now in the resource group, Ranger resource group that I created in location East US 2. So if I click on virtual network, if you get lost, you can now see that it's here. Okay, so if I go to my resource group here and go to this resource group, you should see that network show up over here, one of the resources in my resource groups, right? So let's go to the virtual network here and let's see some details of this virtual network that we have created. So obviously we have created my VNet with this address space. You can see the DNS server for this is Azure provided DNS service. If you recall, I talked about it. It's basically telling you which subscription it is. No connected devices, means nothing is connected to it right now. Let's go to the address space over here. As you can see, this is the address space that we have chosen. Okay, connected devices, there's nothing in there. Subnets is very important. So we created my subnet one. So going back to my diagram, we have created this my subnet one with this address space. As you can see, I have 251 addresses available over here. Okay, there's no network security group that I have associated here. I'm not going to get much into network security groups in this lesson because we'll have a lesson where we'll talk in details. But you can put a network security group directly to your subnet, and we don't have that today. DDoS protection, we know it's selected on basic. It also has other features like you can have a firewall, um, you can have peering. The one we are interested in is the DNS server. So the default Azure provided DNS server is the one we are picking over here. Okay. If you want to use a custom DNS over here, you choose the custom DNS and you can put a custom DNS server over here. So if you have a domain controller that you have created in this virtual network and you have also added the DNS feature and you want that domain controller to handle all your DNS servers for all the virtual machines that you will create in this network, this is where you come and change it at the VNet level. Right now, don't worry about it, leave it at default, but for other folks, that's where you do. There's peerings, like you can do VNet to VNet peerings, service endpoints. We are not going to get into that in this lesson. We're going to just leave it at that. Okay. So now we have created, let's see, we have created this VNet, we have created this subnet, and I'm going to go create a couple of servers over here. So I know that we are going to have a different lesson where we are going to talk all about virtual machines because we haven't talked about creating virtual machines yet. I could literally stop here this lesson and be like, hey, we have learned how to create VNet, we have learned how to create a subnet, and we are good to go as far as this lesson is concerned. But we are not going to get into the we will not be able to understand the characteristics of all the subnets and networking and everything else till we deploy a virtual machine. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to actually go and create this couple of servers in there or a couple of virtual machines in there to give you a little bit more demonstration, right? A network without any server or VMs is useless. So I'm going to go a little bit forward. Do follow this lesson just the way I'm building it and you'll be fine. Virtual machine is a whole world by itself, how to create them and do them, and we will have the next module that will be dedicated to that. But for now, for this example, let's go ahead and create a couple of virtual machines. I'll give you some details on the basic that are required, similar to this for creating a virtual machine. You'll have a little bit of an idea. Don't, I mean, there's nothing to be scared of over here at this point. So we created the virtual network. It's here. Let's go ahead and create the first virtual machine, which will be the server one that we want to create, and 10315 is the IP address that we're going to take from this subnet. Okay. So the way you do that is go to virtual machines, click on add over here. By now, you are probably understanding the pattern in Azure, right? I mean, you want to create a resource, how to go and do this in the portal. So let's go create a Windows server. I want to create a Windows Server 2016 data center, and I'm going to do the deployment model as ARM or Resource Manager. Don't go to the classic. We don't need that. Go create over here. It's going to now ask you similar details like it did for VNet to create this virtual machine. Okay, so the first thing it needs is what's going to be the name. We are going to call it server 1. So let's go ahead and create server 1. What is the disk type? So I'm going to use a standard hard disk drive. I don't want any SSD or solid state drive that you can put over here. What's going to be the username? I'm going to just put Sean as the username. Put whatever you need. Put in a complex password, right? I mean, if it's not a complex password, it's not going to work. So let's put a complex password here. It's check boxes. I mean, it shows the check over here because it's working out. It's asking what subscription. We're going to stick to the subscription. As usual, any resource you build, it has to be within a resource group. We're going to use the existing one. It went and populated the existing one we have. Again, everything has to be together in the same location. So we're going to put East US2. Now it's asking that, hey, do you already have a Windows license? I'm going to just say no. So it gives one to me. And let's go ahead and see what it's going to ask me right now. It's going to ask me to choose a size of this virtual machine. So the way in Azure virtual machines are created is you have to say how much CPU you want, how much RAM you want, how much disk you want, and they have different sizes that are already pre-built for you. So you cannot just go and do anything specific, like something similar you are used to on the VMware or Hyper-V, where you can pick exactly what you want. But for the most purposes, Azure has tons of sizes that are already given to you. So I'm going to go and check this one. So this is going to be D2SV3. It's going to have 2 CPUs, 8 RAMs, 4 data disks, whatever. Um, just pick that one for this purpose because we are not so much into figuring out how this virtual machine is, but more about getting some examples over there. So some of the settings that we need for a virtual machine, just follow along. All of this we will, go over in another lesson. But for now, let's do the basic it takes to get a virtual machine up. So the storage is a standard hard disk drive. Are you going to use manage disk? I'm going to say yes. So this is the interesting part. So the network that we created, so if you click on this, it's actually going and looking for a virtual network that's already created and selects that for you. So while creating a virtual machine, you could have gone and created a network for the virtual machine to reside in. But in real world, you probably want to first plan and create your network first. And once that is created, you want your virtual machines in there. It even picked up the subnet over here. So the only subnet that we have created so far is the my subnet 1, and it's a 10310. I'm going to say that's fine. So the other thing now I want to get into is the public IP address. So we talked about public IP address in previous lessons and a little bit in this lesson as well, is every virtual machine will have a public IP address. And the reason behind that is that you do not have a local access to this server or this VM in Azure's data center. It's not like you can just walk in over there, connect your monitor and your keyboard in a data center and start working on this. Or this is not like a VMware console where you go and say, hey, this is my local server. It doesn't have the network. I want to do that. So by default, Azure will give you a public IP address. And uh, the other reason behind that is that without the public IP address, you cannot get into this Windows server. So by default in Azure, you need the public IP address to RDP or remote desktop to this virtual machine that we will create. And you can see that this is a red asterisk over here means it's a required field. So what Azure is telling you that I'm going to give you a public IP address for your this virtual machine. And like I mentioned in my previous lesson, we are going to use a basic one with a dynamic address. In real world, you probably want to do this static. You don't want the IP address to change often. And like I mentioned, everything in Azure wants a name. So they're just calling this server one IP. Okay, so server one IP basically means it's the public IP. You can name your public IP whatever you want. This new in parentheses or brackets over here, it basically means that, hey, this resource has not been created. It will be a new one that will be created for this specific workload. In our case, this virtual machine you are going to build, right? So this is a new one that is going to create, which is fine. Um, and do we need a network security group? It says basic and it's asking for inbound, outbound ports. I'm not going to get into network security groups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create advanced over here and go to network security groups. That's the only way I can actually say none. I do not want a network security group for now. Okay, so you can have a network security group, like I mentioned, on the subnet or on the virtual machine for granular controls directly. We don't want that. Do we need any extensions? No. Auto shutdown for this virtual machine. I don't need that. I don't need the boot diagnostics. Everything else disabled. No, disabled. Okay. So this is the basic it requires to create a virtual machine in Azure. Don't worry if you're not getting too much of this. Just follow along and we'll create this virtual machine. Okay. So click OK over here and it's going to give you a summary of what this virtual machine is going to be built with, how much it's going to charge you. So it's going to charge me about 11 cents Canadian an hour. So this is one thing I want to, tell you is when you create this virtual machine, your subscription is going to actually start getting charged, right? The way Azure works is that everything is charged by the hour and only charged when you create something and you have something that's up and running. So this virtual machine is going to cost me 10 cents Canadian per hour or whatever denomination or currency you guys have in your part of the world where you're watching this from. You'll actually see that over there. Okay, so remember that. If you're using a subscription for your work, you have to let the account owner know that, hey, we are going to get charged here because this we are creating some virtual machine. If you're doing this in the lab with a free Azure subscription, I think it gives you about 120 or 180 US dollars, which is more than enough for you to actually practice what we are doing, okay? Because you're only charged when something is being used. After we are done with this lab, I'm going to turn everything off or I'm going to delete everything so we're not going to get used for anything else. So use your dollars wisely. And by the way, guys, it's as simple to create a virtual machine in Azure. It like just like how it was easy to create a virtual network. Okay, so once we click on create, it's going to start creating that virtual machine. It's submitting the deployment. The deployment is in progress. It will take a little while for this virtual machine to come up. Um, Takes a couple of minutes actually. So I'm going to let that run. So if you go to virtual machines over here right now, click on refresh, eventually it is going to show up over here and say that it's creating. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and come back. Well, I just clicked on refresh. As you can see, that server one already showed up over here and the status is it's creating. So this server is not created completely yet. We cannot do anything till it shows it's running over here. And you can click on refresh and it'll show you. So I'm going to pause the video and come back once this is created so we don't waste any time. See you in a bit. All right, just checking back with you guys. I'm clicking on refresh. It's been like a minute or so. It's still creating. The reason I want to come back and I wanted to talk to you about one thing, going back to the slides. If you're wondering if it is as simple as creating this virtual network and creating these virtual machines, and we're going to go hands-on that we are doing right now with this demonstration, why is this part one? The reason this is part one, and this is important both for your exams as well as your, you know, real world, skill wise thing, is that we are using Portal or the Azure Portal to create everything today. Okay. You will need to learn to do this through some sort of scripting with PowerShell. So you have to figure out exactly how to use PowerShell to do this from scratch. And you will also have to learn how to do this with Azure CLI 2.0. That is what we have right now. It's on other Linux environments. Okay, so if you do not know how to set up your PowerShell yet or how to set up the Azure CLI in a Linux environment, you probably want to go watch one of my previous videos or lessons that I had where I explained how to go and do that. Okay, because the next lesson, the part two, we are going to actually be using only PowerShell and Azure CLI to build exactly the same thing. So we're going to get the concepts first done in Portal, and then we're going to do the scripting. If you feel, that it's too much for you to go and figure out looking at another lesson, um, you can quite easily do that from something over here called as Cloud Shell in the portal. So in the Cloud Shell, if you click on that, it gives you an option to go and build or have an interface to PowerShell directly from this portal. Like the Bash shell would be the CLI one, and the PowerShell would be the PowerShell one. So you can do that from here as well. Okay, so I'm going to just stop that over here, but go through and look into my previous lesson to go and see how it is done. So let's go ahead and refresh this, and I think it's still creating the server. So I'm going to pause and come back once it's fully up and running. Okay, it takes a few minutes, so don't worry if it's taking some time for you if you're following along to go and do that. All right, so it at least took me 3 minutes to build the server, which is good. Okay, the status is running right now. So this server is up and running at this point. Okay, and it's so let's go ahead and look into the resource groups first because I want to show you for this virtual machine what all resources got created. As you can see over here, the resource that we had before was the virtual network in this resource group. Now we have the server one, which is a virtual machine. You can see that it created a disk for this virtual machine, which is fine because that's the hard disk drive. It created the NIC or the network interface, the server, it gave a random name server 165. It also created the public IP address that's over here. So all of these were created for this server over here. So the stuff that we are really interested in, so let's go into the virtual machine over here, server one. You can see that the name is server one. This was the size that we picked with two virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of memory. As you can see over here, Azure assigned it the public IP address 104.208.216.240. I mean, this is a random public IP address that Azure will pick one and assign to you. Okay. The thing that we want to also notice about this virtual machine, it's in my VNet virtual network in my subnet 1. That's where it is located. And for the DNS name, we don't have that yet for this virtual machine. The other thing I want to note over here is the networking part over here, where you can see this virtual machine, as you can imagine, has a network interface. This is the public IP address, and this is the private IP address in the 10.3.1 range. Okay, it went and assigned this on its own. We did not go and ask it to, but it picked one from the subnet range or space, and it went and assigned one private one over here. It's important that you know that. Okay. Now let's look at something over here. If we go to virtual networks and we go to my VNet, you can see connected devices over here. You can see that there is a network interface that was connected to this virtual network with this IP address 10314, and it's located in my subnet 1. That means there is something active on this virtual network. So essentially what we did is this network was created, this subnet, it's actually registering this server over here. Now, if you are carefully looking at this, let's actually see over here, the IP address is 10.3.1.4, but I have put over here 10.3.1.5. This is actually not done in error. What I'm trying to say is that when this virtual network was created, the DHCP server over there went and found 10.3.1.4 and said this is an available address that I have that I can assign to this NIC or this virtual machine. Okay, so this is actually dynamic right now. It's not static. We haven't assigned this static wise to the virtual machine yet. Okay, I want you to remember that for now. The other thing in the virtual machine, if we go over here, um, the public IP address. Okay, so if you go to the network, so public IP address over here, I have that over here. You can see the server one IP was created. Okay, so if you click on this over here, it gives you some details. It was using the basic SKU. It was named obviously server one IP. This is the IP address it went and picked up, or Azure assigned it. Um, let's go and see over here. It's actually assigned right now to it's associated to this NIC, or this network interface, and this network interface actually belongs to this server one. Okay, so if we go to the network interface over here, we can see this is a little network interface cards picture or icon over here. You can see more details about this. So the interesting thing over here in the network interfaces is the IP configuration. So this is the profile ipconfig1 that is associated to this network interface, and which means that that's what the virtual machine has. As you can see over here, that this has got 10.3.1.4. This is dynamic, and it also got a public IP address which Azure gave, and that was the server one IP. That's the public IP address. So you can actually get into the network interface directly and see that's what is assigned. Okay, what is the DNS server for this network interface? Well, the one that inherits from virtual network. What this really means is that whatever the virtual network had assigned, I'm going to use the same one. So you can actually go and have a custom DNS assigned directly to the NIC or the network interface. Now, overview over here is all the same. There's not much over here that we need to look at, but I wanted to make sure that you understand the NIC, network interfaces, the public IP address as part of this lesson, okay? Because those are the ones you have to either understand or you have to go and have enough knowledge to answer questions in your exam. And that's the virtual network. Okay, now how do we connect to this virtual machine? The way we connect to this virtual machine is through this public IP address. Okay, the Azure actually gives you a quick way to connect to this virtual machine. What basically it does is that when you click on connect, it actually downloads an RDP file, and you click on the RDP file, most of the information with this public IP address and everything else is populated for you. So when I click on connect, it's saying that, hey, we'll be connecting to this public IP address. This is the public IP address of the VM and the port number 3389. That's the standard port for RDP. You can download the RDP file over here. If it was a Linux machine, you would go to SSH. So don't worry, for this example, we're just going to go and say download RDP file. What I really want you to remember here is that this is the reason the public IP address is actually given when a virtual machine is created. If that was not done right now, there was no other way for you to connect to that. Okay, so click on the download RDP file. You click on this. Um, Actually, I'm going to cancel that because I want to show you some details of this RDP file. Go to downloads here. Um, give me 1 second. Open up the download folder here. This is the RDP file that it actually downloaded on your computer. Okay, so if you right click on this and edit this, you can actually see all it does is that it populates it already with the virtual machine's IP address with the port number 3389. That's all it is doing. You can literally open up your remote desktop connection and go and manually enter this public IP address and port number, and you should be good to go. But Azure kind of makes it a little bit easy for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on connect. This is where the username and the password that we had put in that goes in there, and basically it connects to the virtual machine directly. Okay, you are now connecting to the virtual machine. This should be a Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition or Linux or whatever virtual machine you create. I'll let it load. Now, I want to explain one thing over here. For you security-minded folks, you might be wondering, hey, hang on a second, Sean. I'm having a public IP address with the RDP port exposed here for myself to connect here to do any work on the server. But this is like terrible from a security point of view because I don't want people to just get to the prompt over here and throw in username and password and brute force attack me in there, right? You are absolutely correct. the first time we actually go and create the virtual machine, you probably want that IP address to get in there, but eventually there are other ways where you can even have this virtual machine without a public IP address. Okay, like if you have a jump box or you have a secure way, let's say you have a point to site VPN connection where you VPN to your network and you only use the private IP address to connect. So, for example, you'd connect to this virtual machine with with only this private IP, right? So nobody else can access to that. This is where the point to site and everything comes in. Your virtual machine does not have to have a public IP address, but initially you want that to get in there and configure your server or do whatever you really, really want. Okay, that's why it is there, or Azure does that for you. It's not like they're promoting a bad practice. Okay, so we have now seen what? We have now seen server 1 10.3.1.4, but we have 10.3.1.5, so we'll have to go and do that, and I'll show you right now how to do that, okay, to configure this. So let's go to the server. I want to minimize this. I want to show you a couple of things over here. Let's go to the command prompt. So the command prompt will be CMD over here. Um, Obviously, let's go to search and find that. Takes a little bit of time. Let's go click over there, okay? I want to show you a couple of things. Typically on a Windows server, we do ipconfig. So if you do ipconfig over here, you can see the IP address is 10.3.1.4. We know that, right? Because we have seen that already. It was /24, so the subnet mask is 255.255.255. You can see the default gateway for this server to go to the internet is 10.3.1.1. So if some of you already were wondering that when this virtual machine was created, why oh why did it go and give this guy a 10.3.1.4 and not really a 10.3.1.1 or whatever, because that's the range we had for this subnet, right? The reason behind that is that Azure reserves the first three IP addresses all the time: 10.3.1.1, 10.3.1.2, and 10.3.1.3 in our case. Depending on the private IP address you have, you will always see the first resource will be a .4, like 99.99% time. That's because one of the things that Azure did in the backend, as you can imagine, it went and created a default gateway for you. In this virtual network that we created, we did not even talk about a gateway. We didn't talk about firewalls. We didn't talk about anything. So how the hell is this virtual machine connecting to the internet, right? So let's actually see how we can do that. Let's ping www.google.com. You should see it's replying back. Means this server is actually connected to the internet. So let me go over here, show you something. I want to actually disable something before I do this. If I go to enhanced configuration, let me turn this off so the annoying browser on the server is not going to. So if I go to the browser on this virtual machine, I should be able to go to the internet. It's already configured for you. So google.com, I'm 100% sure that it's going to go to google.com because we just pinged it and we got back. So this server is connected to the internet. Azure went and created the gateway for you in the backend, and it gave it the IP address 10.3.1.1, and your virtual machine is using this gateway to go to the internet. And it will also be using that to actually get to the server. If the server was a web server or anything, it will be using that gateway to come in as well. Okay, so that's what I want you to remember over here, that those IP addresses, always the first three are reserved, and in a virtual network you are getting the gateway already for you. So imagine all the things, guys, that this virtual network, when we created with a couple of clicks over there, it created the gateway for you. It created the DHCP server for you. That's how you got the IP address. It went and created the DNS server for you. Like, how exactly are we pinging this if we didn't have a DNS server? Or resolving this address, google.com, to this specific address. So the DNS server is already given. So let's actually go and see that. What DNS server are we using? So for this, we need ipconfig/all. Once we do this, you can see that Azure assigned, and it should be Ethernet adapter over here. So Azure already assigned a DNS server by itself for this over here. Okay, this is very important, because these are the things that you'd have to create in real world on premises if you wanted this virtual machine to get going. But in Azure, you already have a virtual machine that's created, hooked up. and Microsoft already did everything for you here. Now, not wasting time, there's one thing I want to talk about is, as you can imagine with ipconfig, we now have a um, dynamic address that was given to us, 10314. How do you actually go and create a static IP address for this virtual machine? So some of you might already be thinking that, okay, I'll just come over here. I would go to the change adapter settings. This is my adapter. I would go over here to properties and go to TCP/IP version 4 properties over here. I know that it was dynamic. It's a dynamic IP address because my network interface was asking for something automatically over here. So to do a static IP address, all I have to do is come over here and put in that IP address, right? We need 10315 and not 10314. So I'm going to put 10315 over here and I'll get going. Okay, that's not how you're going to put a static IP address for your virtual machine. In Azure, for your virtual network, everything needs to be configured from the portal directly. You do not come to this network interface and put anything over here ever, even if it's a static IP address. I know this is very different from how you do things on premises or even virtual machines that you create probably with your VMware or Hyper-V, but this is not what you are going to do, okay? You are never going to come to this adapter in your career. If ever on an Azure virtual machine, you are having to come over here and looking at this adapter for anything, you're doing something wrong. Just remember, I recall Sean telling me, do not come in this adapter, so I should not have to come to this adapter to do anything over here, adapter setting over here. So you never have to come over here. The way we are going to do this is if you go to the network interface that we created for this virtual machine, we know that this is the network interface. It's attached to server 1, and this was the internal IP address that we need to change to 10315. You're going to click on that network interface. You're going to go to IP configuration, and you can see IP config 1 is associated to this NIC, and it's got 10314. You're going to click on that. It is saying that was is a public IP address enabled for this? Yes, we know that. That's how this NIC actually ended up getting the public IP address that was created. But look over here, private IP address settings, it is set on dynamic, it's 10314. We're going to come over here, click on static, and we are going to click 10315, right? Because this is supposed to be 10315. Let's go ahead and click on static, click on save. It is saving the network interface. I think it kind of restarts, or you should in real world. If this was a production server, you probably want to take a maintenance window if it's already in production and you forgot to do that. Or if you are creating one, make sure you come to the static over here and do that. So it's happening right now. I'm going to pause the video and come back once everything is back up. Okay. I think we already lost the RDP connection over here because the virtual machine probably restarted to, or well, if you change the IP address, it obviously lost the network connection. Doesn't matter it restarts or not. Yep, so let's click on the virtual machine. I'm still waiting. It's been a minute. Yep, it's actually restarting the virtual machine with the new configuration. That's what it's actually taking a little bit of time. So I'm going to keep clicking refresh over here. Usually this kind of task where the virtual machine is restarting and all that takes a couple of minutes. So, if you see it's stuck in starting, give it a few minutes and it will come back into running. Okay, I'm going to pause and come back. Well, looks like it's saved. Let's actually do this. Nope, it's still starting. No worries, we'll wait. Wow, that took good few minutes. It actually probably took more time applying this setting than creating this virtual machine. I actually moved around. I clicked on refresh bunch of times. But anyways, let's go and see the change that we have made. So if we go to this virtual machine and go to the networking over here, we should see the public address being the same. The private IP address now has changed to 10315. So if we go to the downloads we have, or you can click on overview and click on connect from here as well, since I have it downloaded. Uh, let's go and click on this. We should be able to connect to this virtual machine. Let me put in the password. Go yes. Let's log into the virtual machine here. Once we log in there, I want to now go and see the command prompt with CMD once again. Just taking a little time to load up because of this server manager at the back over here. Let me close that. It's always a little annoying. CMD, come on. Okay, all I want to do over here is ipconfig once again and show you that it's now 10.3.1.5. Okay, we should be able to go to the network interfaces here, and obviously we applied that. So if we go to the overview, you can see 10.3.1.5 over here. So this IP address now has 10.3, I mean, is now 10.3.1.5. So we have created server one. So I know the video is now just at the top of the hour. It's almost 1 hour right now of this video, but we are going to go and create this. Good lessons take a little bit of time. I know some people are like, hey, Sean, your videos go a little lengthy. Can you like shorten that? Unfortunately not, because we are doing hands-on stuff here. If you guys are following along, take a break, come back maybe, but we are going to go create this entire infrastructure to understand all the concepts properly. So the next thing we are going to do is we created the virtual machine, we created the subnet, we created this virtual machine. We are going to have one more virtual machine called server 2 with 10.3.1.6 address in this subnet over here, okay? Because I'm going to show you some characteristics of the virtual network. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go over this really fast. So we have server 1 already. Let's click add on the virtual machine. It's going to be a Windows server once again, server 2016 data center. Let's go click on create over here. I'm going really fast on this one because this is going to be very similar to the previous one. I want to make sure it's a standard hard disk drive. Go ahead and put whatever you need to do. We're going to use the existing resource group, same East US2. I don't have a license. Let's go ahead and do that. So creating this virtual machine, by the time we get to the virtual machine lesson, you will probably know how to create a bunch of virtual machines in Azure as well. So this is kind of a lesson which is, teaching a virtual machine as well as kind of teaching you how to create it. I mean, it's about creating a virtual network, but it's also teaching you how to create a virtual machine. Okay, so high availability, everything else is going to be normal over here. Manage disk. As you can see, just like the previous one, picked up my VNet and the one subnet that we have over here. It's creating the new public IP address. So this time it's going to give it another it's going to give uh, a new IP address to this virtual machine called server 2 IP. We want to go to advanced and click no on the network security group because we don't want that. And extensions no, enable auto shutdown off, boot diagnostics off. Let's go ahead and create this virtual machine. Everything else is done. I'm going to go click on create, pause the video, and once everything comes back, we are going to take a look at it. So it'll be interesting to see that what IP address does this VNet actually give to this server, okay? Because we have reserved 10.3.1.5, and we know this is going to be dynamic. I don't know if it's going to be 10.3.1.4. Maybe it's free right now, so it could give that, or it could just give 10.3.1.6. But we are going to make this a static, right? Going to this previous server over here, when I was saying 10.3.1.5, I want to just prove it to you that what happened over here is we did not go and look at this adapter here at all. Okay, so if I go over here, you can see we have not entered anything. It still says obtain an IP address automatically, but Azure knows that this NIC will always get this static address from its side. We never go and touch that adapter ourselves. Okay, so I'll wait for this new virtual machine to come up. All right, it shows the deployment has completed. Let's go to the virtual machines. We should have server 2 and it shows running right now. Now let's go click on server 2. It also got a public IP address. We are interested in the networking part. Actually, think about that. It actually gave it a 10.3.1.4 as the address because the DHCP server within this virtual network said, hey, I have the 10.3.1.4 free once again, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to just give it out. Okay, but according to our thing here, we need 10.3.1.6. So let's go ahead, Go to the network interfaces. We should now see a new NIC over here that's associated with server 2. By the way, if you go to the public IP address over here, we should see the public IP address, the server 2 IP here as well. So we'll go to the network interface here. We'll go to the one that's for server 2. So go to the network interface, go to IP configurations, just like last one. See, it's 10314 dynamic. We're going to click on that. We're going to say nobody. This is going to be 10314. 6, right? I'm going to click on save. We know that this takes a few minutes, so we will wait for, I'm going to pause the video and come back once it's all done. Once it's all done, I'm going to also RDP into it in the same way. Actually, you know what? I'm going to come back and do that. You need some practice looking at this anyways. Okay, this time it didn't take too long. It just took a couple of minutes. Server 2 is up and running. So let's go click on server 2 here. It already has everything I need. Go to networking, just checking once again. Yep, 10316, it's effective right now. So let's go ahead and click on connect and it's going to download the RDP file. So if I go to my downloads, I should see server 2 RDP. Double click on that, click on connect, and it's going to ask me for my username and password. Let's go click OK. Yes. Let's configure remote session. It takes a little bit for the desktop to fully show up, so I'm going to pause and come back. I'm just trying to save time for you guys. All right, so it's just booting up over here. Let's go over here, check the command prompt. It's going to be very similar like the first one. If I do config 10316, as you can see, it's also using the same gateway over here. The information should be pretty similar, right? Like your first one, ipconfig/all. It should actually show it has the DNS server and everything else. So the reason I have this, and let me get to that. So we created the virtual network, we created the subnet, and now we have these two machines in here. So one of the characteristics of the subnets is, obviously, for some of you networking folks who already know about this, is that these two servers should be able to communicate with each other. We also know that these servers already are hooking up to some Azure gateway somewhere, and it goes to the internet, and they both will be capable of doing that, okay? One thing to remember, we don't have any network security groups that are assigned to this subnet or these virtual machines, okay? So everything is pretty open right now. So let's come over here, go to server 1. If I go to server 1, let me clear the screen over here. So host name, this should be server 1. Yep. To communicate with the other server, let's actually ping the other server. So if we go ping server 2, what's going to happen? Can anybody take a guess? There are a couple of things I'm looking for here. I want to see when I ping a server with the server name, is the Azure DNS actually resolving it? Okay, so we know we are on server 1 and we know that this is our IP address 10315. So if we do ping server 2, if I'm going to get it, and it's going to resolve the IP to an IP address, and if it's going to reply back. So if I ping on server 2, you can see that Microsoft actually gave server 2 some sort of an internal DNS name. Don't worry about that. But more importantly, server 2's IP address is actually 10.3.1.6. So these servers are actually getting resolved with the VNet DNS. Okay, they're timing out, and I know why it's timing out. So let's leave it at that for now. I'm going to press Control C, get out of here. If I go to server 2, I should have similar thing. Let's clear the screen. If I go ping over here to server 1, because I'm on server 2, so I'm going to ping server 1, it should resolve to 10315, but there should be no reply. Yep. So it's resolving it to 10315, but it's not replying. So you might say that, hey, Sean, hang on a second. You told me that we are supposed to be able to, communicate between these two servers. If I'm not getting a ping, what's going on here? I thought there's no network security groups and stuff like that. Well, my friends, the thing that happens is, let's actually control C this. The thing that happens is that these servers at least Microsoft Server 2016 actually has its firewall, the server firewall, turned on, right? So this is not our network security groups or any firewall anywhere. So look at this Windows firewall private on. So click on that, turn Windows Firewall on or off. I'm going to come over here and turn off the Windows Firewall that are activated. In production servers, you probably never want to do that unless you have other protection in there. So I've turned it off on server 1. Let's go to server 2 and click on the local server here. The Windows Firewall, it will show it as on. So I'm going to click on that, turn Windows Firewall on or off. I'm going to off that. Okay. Let's get out of here. So let's go back to server 1 because it doesn't matter which server we go to. If I go and to server 1 on server 1 right now and ping server 2, I should get a reply back. Okay. As you can see, not only it resolved the server 2's IP address, it also started showing the reply because we turned off Windows Firewall. Okay, so we know that this part of this network is actually completed right now. This subnet has two virtual machines. They're getting on the internet. They're talking to each other. I mean, we verified that with ping. Now, really, really fast. I'm going to do this in record speed. Once again, guys, I know this video is getting a little bit long, so pause it if you're a little tired, or if you want to review it, go back and review it, do whatever you need to do. But we really need to get this concept going. I know I'm jam packing a lot into this part, the part 1, but it's good for you. Okay. We are now going to go to this virtual network where we created subnet 1, and we are going to create the subnet 2. And this is going to be the address space for the subnet 2, and we are going to create a server in there. And you can notice because this is the subnet's ID 1032, we're going to have 10325 for this virtual machine. Okay, let's go ahead and try doing that really, really fast. You guys probably could test yourself or quiz yourself by doing this yourself, how to do that. Okay, so let's go to virtual network here. We know in the virtual network, there's a tab over here for subnet. We can see that my subnet 1 was the one that we created when we first created this VNet. Okay, so what happens if you want to create subsequent subnets in the VNet? Well, we just come to subnet over here, like most things, click on the plus sign over here. We're creating a new subnet, and we are going to name this as my subnet 2. The address space for this is 10320, right? So let's go 10320/24. It's already there for us. We don't want any network security groups here. We don't want any route table. We don't need any, service endpoints over here. Click OK. This should be done very, very fast. It doesn't take too long to create. As you can see, a couple of seconds later, it now created this subnet 2. So literally, we just got this subnet created over here. Now we want to create a virtual machine in here. It's very similar to the previous one. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we go to virtual machines here, add, it's going to be Windows Server. I need a Windows Server 2016. And I'm going to show you that why I'm showing you this thing once again. So we are going to call this as server 3, right? So let's go ahead and call this server 3 and standard hard drive, Sean. Oops. Okay, we're going to use the existing resource group, which populated here, East US 2. Okay, everything looks normal so far. We're going to pick up a size right now. I think I've been picking the same size, which is good. D2SB3, let's select that. Now, there's one thing I want to show over here. Everything else is good over here. The disk type is good, manage disk. But look at the thing over here. It went and picked the right VNet, the virtual network, my VNet, but it went and picked the subnet as my subnet 1. So you want to click that. And before, we just had one subnet here. Now it has the other subnet option. So we know that this virtual machine is in this subnet, so we have to pick that. I wanted to show you that. It actually now moved to the other subnet. It's creating a public IP address like it's supposed to. I'm going to click on advanced here, go click on none for the network security group. Yeah, So my subnet 2, that's good. I'm going to click auto shutdown off, disabled, everything else. Cool. I'm going to come back, guys, when this virtual machine has been created because I need to show you one more thing before we are done for this lesson, okay? See you in a bit. All right, took a few minutes to actually come up as expected. Sometimes you have to refresh the browser for it. It kept showing creating for like good 3-4 minutes, and I clicked on this. Okay, so the server 3 is created. Let's go to server 3. A couple of things we want to notice off the bat. We know that it's probably going to give it a 10.3.2.4. Yep, that's the DHCP address by default it gave, so we have to obviously change that. No big deal. Go to network interfaces over here. We should see three network interfaces. For server 3, 10.3.2.4, this is the NIC. You have to absolutely make sure this is the right one. So as you can see, the previous two were in the 10.3.1 subnet. This is the 10.3.2.1, right? All we need to do is now change this to 10.3.2.5. So let's go ahead and do that IP configuration. Just like last time, ipconfig1 profile is attached to this uh, interface. It's dynamic. We need to change that to static 10.3.2. We need to make this 5. Save this and come back when this is done, guys. Alrighty, looks like that's done. So let's go back to the network interface here. Let's see, 10.3.2.5. Looks like we now have this 10.3.2.5, this one, and this subnet done as well. Okay, awesome. Let me go connect to this virtual machine now, server 3. Click on connect. It should let me download the RDP file, server 3. Let's go click on that. And let's wait for the server to come up. All right, so we are logged into server 3 right now. Let's go ahead and get our command prompt, cmd. I want to go over here, do ipconfig real quick. Okay, so 10.3.2.5 is the IP address. As you can see, it actually has its own gateway. This is not 10.3.1.1 any longer. So 10.3.2.1. Okay, so that's the default gateway. So one thing I want to mention is that this subnet has its own gateway to get out, and this server 3, or in this subnet, my subnet 2, has its own gateway to get out and communicate. Okay, so that's why 10.3.2.1. In the previous server, like server 2, if I did an IP config here, just to verify, right? See, they had 10.3.1.1. Okay, so now let's talk about one last thing, server 3. I want to go and disable the firewall on server 3 as well. Can anyone guess what will happen now that I disable the firewall over here? Let's refresh that. It should not be there. Okay, it's turned off. So if I am on, let's do a hostname check. I'm on server 3. If I want to communicate with server 1, what's going to happen? Well, let's figure it out. It's actually going to get a reply. So the concept, very important for your exam and very important for real life scenario, is by default, the virtual network here allows servers or virtual machines in these subnets to communicate with the other servers in the other subnet. In real on-premises networks, this is basically a switch, right? You have a server connected here, you have a server connected here. You probably created a VLAN which has this subnet. You probably created another VLAN which is also part of, which is this subnet, part of this one single switch. You would need layer 3 routing between these two VLANs to have these servers between these subnets to communicate. Okay? It's if you guys have configured a switch before, a layer 3 switch, these days it's relatively cheap. You would probably have to do this with a lot of configuration. In fact, if you have just switches for this subnet over here and switches for subnet over here. Or even if it's the same switch which allows you to create a VLAN, you'd need a gateway or some sort of a router to actually go and route the traffic between these two subnets. But um, in Azure, this is already done for you out of the box. Okay, very important concept for the exam is that communication between these subnets within the same VNet is allowed by default. Now, another thing that might come into your mind for you security folks who are more into real world building this, environments and stuff is what if I did not want my this subnet and this subnet to actually communicate, right? Let's say my this subnet was a DMZ or demilitarized zone where all my outside traffic come to the web servers over here, and this was my database server, and I really didn't want all the traffic to just pass through over here because then there's no isolation over here, right? This is where the network security groups come in, right? You would put a network security group over here, you'd put a network security group over here, and you would control the flow between these two subnets, which ports you allow, which ports you don't allow, all happening through the network security groups. And that will be part of our next lesson, which is quite a bit on how you do that. In on-premises network, those network security groups are nothing but actually firewall appliances or some sort of a firewall device that will not allow traffic between this. Or it could be an ACL on your, layer 3 network switches, which will allow you to block some of this traffic. But what I'm trying to get at is you not only looking at stuff just normally, but you looking at Azure and appreciating the things that are done for you that would take a lot of time planning and configuration to do this in real world. Okay, we essentially created a very small data center here today with our virtual network, with bunch of virtual machines and everything else. In real networks, real cloud um, networks, you now just keep adding more subnets or more servers based on what you want to do. Eventually, that resource group that we were talking about earlier, that resource group essentially becomes your entire data center. Like it could have hundreds or thousands of virtual machines here with multiple networks and everything that are grouped together. Okay, see all these resources that we created here. I want to show one last thing. Now that if we go to this virtual network over here, you can see all these connected devices, right? Under the connected devices, you can see those three network interfaces, 10315, 10316, and 10325. Okay, so guys, this was part one. I'm going to have this diagram probably in GitHub for you guys as an image file so you can refer to that while you are building um, your environment. In the next subsequent lessons, we are going to actually keep using the same diagram and keep building on it because we now know how to do this. In the next lesson, we are going to do this through PowerShell. We'll build the same network. Everything is going to be the same, okay? Except that we're going to do this in PowerShell and we are going to do this in Azure CLI. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about how those scripts will be built, what are the commandlets, because Microsoft tends to kind of, you don't have to remember everything from a commandlet and commands point of view, but Microsoft gives you enough of those questions these days where, rather than asking you how you do this in a portal, they'll give you a commandlet and be like, hey, how do you do that? So the next lesson is going to be quite important too. But I think we have accomplished quite a bit here. You have learned to create a virtual network. You have learned how to create servers, virtual machines, subnets, how they communicate. This is a lot. And this is a long lesson. I expect you to like pause and take a break and go back if required to clarify a concept and figuring out how to do this yourself. And I was very excited creating this lesson today, guys, for sure, because this is the first time we actually went in and did a lot of work on the portal. We actually built something together here, right? And I hope you are really as hyped up like as I was in this lesson to actually build something on your own. Now, one thing I want to mention actually before I read this out is Your subscription currently is actually being charged when these servers are running. So you can actually go and stop them. If you stop them, you'll be only charged for like little storage that you have for these virtual machines. It's going to be a couple of cents here and there, but it's not going to be the 10 cents a minute because if you keep this running, and these were pretty large virtual machines, as you can imagine, um, you will incur cost. The way you do this in the lab is you turn them off when you are not using them, or even if you are using this at work for dev work, just turn them off. The other thing is that I do is once my entire lab is done, I just delete the entire resource group and all the resources that are in there. So if you don't see anything under your resource groups, nothing is being charged. Okay, so the way you do this is get into the resource group, you go click on delete resource group. It's going to ask you to type in the resource group name over here. You paste it over here, and if you click on delete, everything that we have created has been deleted. Let me warn you, and this has happened before, do not do this so willy-nilly in your production environment. Like I mentioned, this resource group is your data center. So you may be deleting your entire data center by just coming over here and clicking on delete. So think about it 100 times, if not like, 1,000 times before you go delete a resource group. If this is your lab, don't worry about it. We just want to save cost because I know Microsoft only gives so much in a trial subscription for you. You need to save and squeeze in your cost as much as possible, right? So once you have finished this lab with me and subsequent ones, you go and delete that resource group, or minimum at least turn off the virtual machines. The compute or the virtual machines in Azure is the most one of the most expensive resource. So you want to make sure those are gone. So once this is completely deleted, I'm not going to wait for it. If you click on refresh, there will be nothing in the resource group. So you're not going to be charged for anything. All right, guys, no kidding this time. I'm really going to end this lesson. Um, all right, so the training site is in cloudranger.net. You are viewing this on YouTube. The slides are going to be posted on slideshare.net/Sean Esmail. Connect me on Twitter. Follow me at Sean Esmail. GitHub is where I'm going to put the resources. So for this lesson, I'll probably put that image up. I'll probably have a couple of links to, talk about some of the details. Connect me on LinkedIn. And guys, if you find this lesson that has been helpful for you for your exam or even real world, um, do me a favor. Nominate me as a Microsoft MVP by going into that link and selecting someone you want to nominate, put my name in there, and we can take it from there. Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for viewing. Please give a thumbs up and like the video. Do leave any comments or questions if you have on the YouTube video. And I will see you on the part 2 of implementing and managing virtual networks next.